Our talk for this morning is entitled Use of Tarot for Contact with Masters. Now, I realize that those who have not been familiar with the esoteric aspects of tarot in the past have thought of it as something rather exciting in terms of fortune-telling or divination. And I also realize that there are many who never even heard the word tarot at all, even though they may have been in occultism a long time. And I also realize that there are many who, having heard of tarot, have thought of it as being something other than it is, at least as it is if we relate the interpretation of tarot basically to the Western mystery teachings and trainings. So I think I should point out to you that, to begin with, tarot, though many of you have heard the story, let's remind ourselves of a thing or two, and then we will see what it can and does do if utilized correctly as a device for achieving certain states of consciousness. Now then, let's first remember that, after all, tarot is the type or the group of symbols which were presented to the world at a certain time in the world's history when we had just, as a matter of fact, entered what we call the Dark Ages, or shall we say the ages in which wisdom, knowledge were blocked, or where it became a sin to think, to investigate, to search for reality or truth, or to accept anything as reality or truth, except that which the people in authority at the time said was reality or truth. In other words, like we often say to our children, it's so because I say so. And that is supposed to have ended the matter. But as we always know, there are those during all times, during all climes, who can't accept this or that is true because I said so, whoever the I happens to be, the authority figure. There are those who have to have it proven to them. There are those who have enough of the logical faculty, so they start questioning the apparent teachings or the authoritarian teachings. And of course, these particular groups were in a pretty unhappy situation, although it is sad to say there weren't as many of them as we would wish. So during the period of the very dark ages, or as they came upon us, there was a development in which occultism was continuously taught. In other words, in which the esoteric truths retained an ability to spread the influence of reality and the ability to test this reality, but it had to be done in a very clever and even, shall we say, in a rather underhanded method and manner. And you know how it says how he must be as subtle as a serpent. The evil of subtlety is only if it is used to injure another. But when it is used to help another, or to protect oneself from being destroyed by those who are very palpably and very obviously rather immature youngsters, spiritually speaking, we can see that the necessity for subtleties are come upon us more often than we even remotely may realize. Now then, at that particular period, it was decided to bring tarot out exoterically into the world, to bring it about in such a way as to embody it with the type of images which were known to be basic to subconsciousness. And along with that, it was also utilized as a sort of device in order to throw those who were very orthodox-minded into a type of confusion, because it was introduced to the world as the game of man. And you know how certain games take hold. I don't know how many of you during the period of your lives have become bridge fiends or canasta fiends or pinochle fiends or poker fiends. And by fiends, I don't mean anything against it. There's something very exciting about being able to sit down and play a game and say, I'm playing a game. And it is just the game. It's a sort of sharpening of the wits. At any rate, tarot was deliberately introduced in that manner in order to throw off the enemies, and incidentally enemies there at that time were something much more dangerous to have than today, inasmuch as any enemy of spiritual thought or independent spiritual observation really meant that one was going to have a very tough time of it and then die in any case. In other words, it's like has been said of certain types of people. They're not only full of the kind of hatred where they say somebody should drop dead, but they go into great lengths to describe the manner in which they should drop dead, and they want to make sure there's all kinds of suffering. They say they should not die yet, because first they should have this kind of experience and that and this pain and that pain, and then finally they should drop dead. There are people like that, you know. They would be very sad if someone just retired from the physical body without pain. There's an intensity of frustrated energy that expresses itself in a type of hatred, even though these very people are also capable of a great love under the proper conditions. I mean, this we must see. If you're capable of one, you're always capable of its opposite when you discover what it is and learn how to swing the energy around to the other direction. So that we did have a situation where it became very necessary to protect the few who had enough mentality, enough emotional drive in order to wish to experience and test and try and verify. You might call them spiritual scientists. I always rather like that term. And tarot was introduced to the world exoterically at that time with the utilization of the symbols which would have the most meaning to the culture of that time. Now then, some people say, why don't we change these tarot keys and make them more modern? Why don't we change this image and that image? Scientists who know about subconsciousness, that is, I'm talking about the psychological scientists, usually do not say that. But the ones who say it are the artists, because they love beauty and they love certain form. And they want to represent tarot in accordance with their idea of the modern time or modern period. And their idea is not a bad one, except that it doesn't work. Because you see, the modern time or the modern period that we live in today with its form is after all modern, and therefore it is not as deeply embedded in subconsciousness as are the times that relate to the period when tarot was given to the world. For the outer world is just an apparent game from which our playing cards have descended, you know, and from the inner sense as a method for developing certain very potent energies and powers. Now the point is, getting to subconsciousness in itself is not so difficult. For instance, if you are a good subject for hypnotism, your subconsciousness can be gotten at instantly by any hypnotist. You give up your self-conscious mind to the hypnotist, and there you are. And then that hypnotist serves as your subconscious mind. And you become an almost complete subconscious response mechanism for somebody else's self-consciousness. Sometimes this method is helpful. Sometimes. I would say not often. But occasionally it is helpful for very special conditions. On the whole, I don't think that aspirants for the higher truths, or who wish to become masters of their own being, or should give up their self-conscious direction to anyone, because, after all, when this is done, subconsciousness will then receive whatever is given, and it may not be in accordance with your own basic needs, requirements, or real desires, whatever the surface desires might be. So we have that situation that has been involved also, as you see, the idea of the medieval imagery that the tarot keys show. Nevertheless, as I have pointed out to you, it is this medieval imagery that holds a longer, perhaps one of the longest histories of a continuous impact upon subconsciousness, not just the personal. I'm speaking about the mass subconsciousness. And remember, our greatest problems really reside in our reactions to the various levels of the mass subconsciousness, depending on what level we are reacting to in accordance with the mass at the time. Some days we can react to the very highest levels. Haven't you noticed it? Then there are other days when we can't. There are other days when somehow all the lower levels come up. There are some days we feel we have it, we understand it, we can control this and that unreasonable or illogical emotional surge. Then there are other times we discover, my ye gods, we're thinking and feeling about as illogically and emotionally and savagely as anything we can ever remember having been or done. And of course, these swingings, this is really something that I think all aspirants should be warned about regularly, because so many people then get discouraged and they fall by the wayside. And this is a shame, because if one realizes that all of livingness has to do with in-breathing and out-breathing, with the up and down cycles, if we realize that there are times when we can more easily swing to our upper vibratory levels, and there are other times when the lower vibratory levels tune us in to more of the lower mass mind elements, why then there's something in us that keeps bringing a strength to our soul and our individuality, where although we watch these reactions taking place, we don't get pulled into them. Not really. You see, because there's a part of us that keeps itself free. And that way, we swing out of it more readily, more rapidly, just because we have something to hang on to. Even if it's just one little fraction of our consciousness that can say, this is a cycle. This is a tune-in to the vibratory level, which it is part of my destiny and responsibility to transmute for myself and all of life. And by the very act of being able to keep objective, that is, to keep that fraction of my awareness uninvolved, by keeping that fraction of my awareness apart from it and saying, my true me, or my true I am, or the Ahea that we chant together to help bring that awareness into our consciousness, in case you haven't realized that. If you hang on to that, it's astonishing how much more rapidly you come through a cycle like that, with more spiritual strength, more self-conscious alertness, more depth of capacity for living, loving, knowing, experiencing, being, so that you start looking back and seeing that these low tides aren't bad. They're the very things you press against to develop your muscles in the inner sense. Now then, it also was certainly known at the time that the adepts had decided to give tarot to the world. It was known that something much more specific had to be utilized from that period forward because of the uh, influx of new energies which were already starting to make themselves felt as a preparatory thing for the influx of the New Age Aquarian energies, which we have just barely entered into, you know. That's why we're still not very New Age as an entire, shall we say, humanity group, though those of us who are spiritual aspirants, I mean true spiritual aspirants, who are working with the forces and are willing to keep working with them as being the greatest adventure that life can hold. Those like ourselves, then, can certainly say that we are the, you might say, forerunners for helping to bring an extra strength and stability into the mass mind so that more of our entire life wave will have what is required to bring to this planet what it is destined to have, whatever things may look like at the moment. Though not all, as you've heard me say before, are going to make it, this life wave. Only those who manage to get over a borderline, and this borderline happens to be something that is a vibratory level. Please always remember this. Please keep in mind that the reason we get together, as we do regularly, is because we are working on changing and heightening vibratory levels within ourselves. And this involves all parts of ourselves, not only the mind, not only the emotions, but all of the inner vehicles, and not only those, but also the physical vehicle, which has to be the instrument that can bring it in and ground the energy, so to speak. This is what we're working on. But the point about the masters, some of you may have been thinking, well, when are we going to hear about masters? There's something so exciting about the word master, you know, the way we grab up the books and the ideas and the thoughts, and some of us will just love to take our books and just retire away in our own little corners to read all about how marvelous they are. And we will go out to lectures on masters if it's going to give us some more information on masters when we wouldn't dream of going out if what we were going to get is, for instance, information and help on how to transmute our own personalities. It's much more exciting to not people like ourselves, or most of people like ourselves, I know. I'm talking about our people as a whole, and we all have a little of it in us, and that's part of what makes us kin, isn't it? Our own kith and kin, really, degrees and ages and reactions. So then, as I said, the question may come up, then what has this got to do with masters? Well, you see, the point is this. Contact with whatever we think of as masters certainly has to do with an ability and capacity to vibrate our consciousness to the level that can receive broadcasts. As you've heard me say so often, any transmission station, as well as any station that receives the vibratory levels of the radio waves, for instance, which go through your body and are there all the time, whether you're conscious of it or not, you need a special instrument to bring in a very specific broadcast. Furthermore, you need to have this instrument in good shape, in good order, so it can bring in whatever broadcast it wants. If you hate jazz, what good is it going to do you to have a radio if you can't tune it into a station that broadcasts classical music, and or vice versa? So that having a radio station, which is really the physical body, you know, isn't quite enough. We are though we so rarely realize it, we are growing our radio station because we are a living station. And all things that have consciousness are really the living aspects of the Most High. So you might say that we are growing our abilities and capacities to receive. And you might also say that evolution has every bit as much to do with growing the stations within ourselves that can receive the vibratory levels of broadcasts that come from the higher levels of consciousness of the Most High, like the adepts and the higher adepts and the masters of wisdom and the higher beings and the archangels and angels and levels and expressions of divinity itself. It's a continuous ladder of vibratory areas. You might say that if you take one ray and think of it coming from the sun to you, some of you might develop the ability to reach the area of the consciousness of the ray, say 1 foot up from yourself, and others 2 feet up from yourselves, and others several hundred feet up, and some several million feet up. Do you see what I mean? And the degree of what your consciousness could reach would give you the degree of overall information contact unity. Just like if you're on top of a mountain, you're going to see a greater vista than if you're in the valley, isn't that right? And so in the same way, as you can bring your own consciousness to a vibratory rate, and this always involves emotions, remember. In Western occultism, in the true training system, we keep trying to help you realize that you do not separate your emotions from your consciousness except to know which is which at any given moment. Because without emotion, you have no drive or ability to concentrate. And so it is the emotional, mental nature, and I always prefer to put a hyphen in between to try to show this principle to you. It is the emotional, mental nature that has to be attuned in such a way that it can receive. And then from this receiving, one starts having changes in the actual atomic structure of the physical body, though it comes in and through what we call the finer vehicles, or that is the so-called psychic and spiritual bodies that we have, which we also have. Then contact with the masters really has to do with something far more than most people realize. I know all of us, especially when we first entered metaphysics or occultism, dreamed of being contacted by a master. And we thought, wouldn't it be so wonderful? And the times we dreamed it usually were the times we were the most immature. And it was just a sort of change from our dreaming about having somebody take care of us, like returning to the child because our responsibilities were heavy or what have you. And so most of us, if not all of us, have had a dream like that, and this isn't bad. It starts something in motion. It shows that at least you're willing to switch your desire and yearning from just the purely parental figure to something that is a wider type of parent, or at least something that has wisdom and knowledge and can give help. But it is just a stage. Sometimes we withdraw to it in trouble and still like to daydream it, and it's fine. It doesn't hurt you as long as you know what you're doing. It's when you don't know what you're doing that you get hurt, incidentally. And sometimes we need to just relax into certain thoughts and emotions. Therefore, the idea of dreaming about a master of wisdom contacting us does seem to become very prevalent in the Western world. It's too bad this has happened, really, though. Now, in the Eastern occultism, although, as you've heard me say many a time, we feel that the methods, that is the actual technical aspects or techniques of Eastern occultism, were not designed for Western minds, bodies, or environment, and that more often than not, damage comes about. One has to be a terribly strong soul not to experience a certain damage from trying to go in for the technical, detailed aspects of the Eastern occultism. I'm not even talking about the philosophy, because basically, if you dig deeply enough, the philosophies are exactly alike. And if you dig deeply enough, the aspirations are really exactly alike. But the Eastern occultism is meant for one phase of humanity's evolution, where one discovers the mystical reality within himself. And the Western occultism is meant to bring not only the discovery of this mystical reality, this eternal reality of our true I, but to get us to use it, to have it, to keep it, and to utilize it for all living beings. And when I say all living beings, I don't mean only humanity. I mean all living beings, eventually. There's a great difference. Lots of people do not realize that Eastern occultism is wonderful, fine. It was the thing that appealed to me, certainly, through my earlier years. Nevertheless, it is not the highest kind of spiritual training, because people have thought of retiring to mountaintops or caves and doing nothing but meditating and seeing how much power they've developed to dry sheets on them, wet sheets. God, you can go to any good psychic medium who can bring you good physical phenomena, and they can do lots of marvelous things. Having psychic power doesn't mean one has spiritual power, capacity, or ability to project this capacity, this spiritual capacity to others, incidentally, as you've heard me say before also. But the thing that it is necessary to bear in mind is that Western occultism, that is the true Western occultism, I'm not talking about elementary metaphysics, the highest Western occultism is an advance over the Eastern occultism. And that those who are drawn to the real work and training have already been through Eastern occultism in previous incarnations. In other words, more of you than you realize have already, in past incarnations, retired to mountaintops and caves and done nothing but meditate, or at least say you're meditating while you snoozed, and walked around with bowls, which was really, an easy way not to have to work for a living. For many, not for all. There were always the sincere ones, though there have always been few, in case you don't know it, rather than many. And those of you who have this drive to try to bring the higher spiritual truths into expression and to be able to do something with it in and for humanity and the rest of life, you have this because you already know intuitively, your own higher soul knows the truth about your eternal beingness, even though your self-conscious mind doesn't remember it. Even though you may think with your self-conscious mind that you are out to verify an idea with, do I really survive? Your higher soul already knows, and everything you do, the way you live, is an indication of it. I remember when I used to love to brag about the period when I was an atheist. Matter of fact, I still do, I'm sorry to tell you. The period when I was an atheist, having had these cosmic and extraordinary experiences just about all through my childhood, I came to a point as I entered adulthood at exactly age 21 when hell broke loose, to an even greater degree than even I could take. And I was able to take plenty. I decided there could be no God and there could be no justice in the world. If there was no justice, there just couldn't be a God. And so I went around being very religiously atheistic for about 3 years. And during that time I tried to reform the world more than I ever did before or since. So you know what kind of an atheist that must have been. Who loves, I couldn't bear the pain of my fellow creature. And this just tore me to pieces more than almost anything else. Yet I just used the term that loosely. I decide I'm an atheist. What I really was, I decide I don't believe in the nonsense that has been taught and that has come to me all through the years up to that point. And it's not an unspiritual state to be in. The thing is, I continue to have faith in humanity and in living creatures. And of course, as long as you have faith in that, your higher soul knows that humanity is a child of God, even though self-consciously you may be screaming, I'm an atheist, with that foolish lack of realization. So that I have also often said that there are many atheists that are far more spiritual than so-called spiritual aspirants who call themselves such and go around quoting what's good and bad and what's right and wrong and tearing their fellow man apart and marching around with a superior spiritual air because they have truth with a capital T. It is loving humanity is the indication, not whether self-consciousness recognizes it yet or not. Still, the higher level happens to be such that self-consciousness must come to recognize it. In other words, until we consciously know who and what we are not at all in a position to use this knowledge in its fullest sense. And so this is why I say to you that those of you who are driven with spiritual aspiration, to know reality, and who want reality, no matter what it is, who have that sort of almost illogical faith that as long as it's reality, it must be good or part of divinity, inasmuch as it's reality. In other words, it's faith in the destiny of life. And that is the only real faith that exists. All these other little faiths, these dogmatic fundamentalist things, these are not fit, really, for higher spiritual occultists at all, though other people may need it. And if they need it, they have it. That's what they're attracted to, and it's good for them. Therefore, keep in mind that this idea of retiring to a hermitage or to a cave or to a mountaintop in order to attain the highest, although it is a valid thing for certain stages of evolution, it is not valid for the Western mind, body, or culture, or destiny. You would not be drawn to spiritual aspiration and the spiritual path in a Western body, in a Western culture, if this were supposed to be your way or your next step. You would be in the culture that made it natural and easy and invited it for you, if that were the next step for you. And I say that many a human being walking the Western world, when I say Western world, I don't mean any part geographically. I mean the culture that one has accepted at this time, just the culture aspect. Those who are seeing the importance of making heaven on earth for man here and letting the heaven beyond earth take care of itself with how we live our spiritual beings, our lives, our thoughts, our emotions, just what we do with our energies. But do bear in mind that the fact that you're here in this culture shows that you have already had mystical experience, even though you consciously do not remember. And I mean, you have already experienced that which some of our Eastern brethren call samadhi or nirvana. But samadhi or nirvana, my darlings, I can assure you, it is a state of ecstasy. This is true. Rapture unspeakable. This is true. But I can assure you that you cannot remain in that type of state in a universe that's an evolving universe. And those who try to could be compared to the schizophrenics who retire into an inner world because they cannot bear reality and responsibility of the outer world. This I can assure you. Now, I am in a position to say this because, after all, I have known what that state has been since I can remember. Apparently, as I was born with it, certainly the recollections from my earliest childhood has involved the remembrance of this state, the state that is described as samadhi and or nirvana. I had it quite regularly as a child. I lost it for a short time. I regained another level of it later, and you know what? It was less than nothing to me in terms of meaning when I regained it after I started the path again, this time for the retraining for this job. And this may shock you. You may say, my God, if I could have an experience like that. But the point is, I knew that that had a vibratory level that pulled away the consciousness and the awareness, pulled it away from you, and you, and you. In that state, there is no awareness that other human beings, other creatures, other anything exists. One is beginningless, endless ecstasy and rapture. One is eternal beingness, and there is naught else. There is naught else in that state. I can have it at will. You think I would now? Sometimes when I need to sort of comfort myself, like I say, it's all right for you to daydream for a few minutes. I wouldn't dream of doing this because it would unfit my vehicle that much more for being able to work in the vibrations that we need here for me to help you. And to the degree that I would withdraw to that, and I could, to that degree would I be that much less able to take the vibratory levels that exist here that I have to be in and remain with in order to bring my love and my blessing and my help and all things that I can bring in and through whatever I have, which is very little indeed, but what I can channel, which is much, because it comes from those that are beyond me, as the hierarchy right into the heights of the heart of God. And it's because that this can be channeled for you, and for many that I've never seen in my life. And what difference does that make? My heart knows them, because my heart feels the pain of the world. And this I don't go for. I could withdraw from it, and what kind of being would I be? So you can see the idea of trying to withdraw from the world or from life because one can experience nirvana or ecstasy, samadhi, and know that there's a beginningless, endless beingness that is rapture and eternal love. This is a lovely thing indeed, but in that state, as I have told you, one is not aware of all these fragments of life which are parts of God. And others can say that's reality and this is unreality. I say to you, this is not true. It is not true. That is reality on that level. And this is reality on this level. And to withdraw to a level of reality where one is unaware of the reality level and pain of this is, to me, the sin of sins for those who had the ability to do it. The selfishness, it is to me a destruction of the very thing that the divine will is working for. And that is to bring about the completed individuality and awareness and power of each and every one of us, which is our destiny. And so we all remain in the ship though some of us have seen more of the pattern than others. We remain in the ship, and some of us make some profound sacrifices, and we all do at times, and some of us more than others at one time, and then later, even this can have its change. But the masters of wisdom, then, are what? The human beings, just like every one of us here. Each of us sitting here right in this temple are on different levels. Some of it is so minute. Still, we're not all on exactly the very infinitesimally small iota of vibrational level, because no matter what number you take, if you divide a 1 in half, you still have the 2 halves of the 1, and you divide those and divide those, you can always have that fraction that is just that fraction different, even though it is so alike. Now, the tarot keys, remember, having been given by the hierarchy, in order to embody the positive aspects of consciousness, in order to give us something to hold on to, because consciousness must have symbol. And you know very well that if you try to meditate on a triangle, or 2 lines or 3 lines, you're not going. Your awareness isn't going to be held as well as if you look at a whole picture, a picture that embodies the ideas in its own motion. And so each tarot key, you see, embodies these groups of geometrical figures that deal with very special states of expressions of consciousness. In order to stir, first of all, to hold your attention, to impinge upon your consciousness something that you don't yet know completely, but others who do know it completely utilize this as what you might call a telepathic method of teaching training. So that you are actually, just like you take a radio station and you turn it to your programs. Your tarot keys, when you learn to work with them, as we teach you to do in the lessons you receive at home, and when you become more and more sensitive to the receptivity by the group work we do here, through what we channel from the hierarchy and the masters, your tarot keys serve as that ability to get that fine tune-in on that station, to help you to get your programs more and more clearly, so that you can start reacting to the vibratory levels and controlling them within yourself. And the states of consciousness of the masters, remember, keep this in mind, are states of consciousness of more profound knowing of who and what you are, who and what we are, what life is, what God is, what the universe is, why the universe is. And so each of these truths is embodied in a pictorial image. Always, at some part of the world, at some time, there are at least a certain amount of individuated bits of God, bits of consciousness, in other words, sentient beings, who are utilizing or working with these keys in special ways. When Dr. Case first started to investigate the tarot as a very young boy indeed, being drawn and fascinated by his higher soul, though he didn't know it in his conscious mind, why he was that fascinated, poring over these keys, and at that time hardly anything was known. It was because he kept buying every kind of tarot card he could find, reading whatever little there was. His consciousness was so immersed in the keys that they started to vibrate his whole tune-in ability and capacity to a degree where he started to hear and feel and see and experience the higher vibratory levels, and this was how he was first contacted by the Master Wisdom, who was our Master of Wisdom, was behind the work of Builders of the Adytum, who's this direct disciple I am, and who utilizes me as the channel, and somebody else probably utilizes the Master somewhere off there, but I always figure, let's take care of where we are. and forget the rest. The archangels, I mean, I could fight with them another time at whatever element they are uh, involved in at the moment, and they can smile at me just like I was smiling at my grandsons yesterday when they came in to take gross advantage of me, which they did. They always succeed because I cannot resist them. I'm sure the masters really can't resist us either, incidentally. If we'd only approach them like my grandsons approach me, if we would chuckle at them charmingly and just reach with our hearts, we'd be more tuned in, more specifically. We would receive the help we need more definitely. Nothing in the world, and therefore that means God, can resist that state of mind and heart which is like the child's. And we are all children of the Most High, remember. So remember, keep in mind in relation to the tarot as a method for contacting the masters, that in actuality, every time you work with your tarot keys, you are in training to receive more and more of the fullest broadcasts. These broadcasts are always through the hierarchy. There is no such thing as broadcasts that go beyond it, just like every radio station has to have its transmission areas and its input and plugging into the electrical, whatever it is that they plug into, and so on. The point is that in our own individual evolution, we become more and more various levels of this whole hierarchical receptivity as well as projective ability. And to the degree that we are able to become receptive in the true sense, which we do as we work with these different powers of consciousness in and through the tarot keys, to that degree do we also develop the power to become projective, that is, to express outwardly to the rest of life and to our near and dear ones. If you're an aspirant, and you are, or you wouldn't be here, you will know that there never was a time the masters were not in contact with you. There never was a time that God was not and is not in contact with you. There never was, nor will there ever be a time that all the higher forces and vibrations aren't in contact with you. They're there because you're a living part of God. You are guided by the masters always, all the time, always. Nevertheless, his guidance is not by this direct fiat, or the way it would seem in accordance with many books we have read. But you are guided. You have the contact because as an individuated part of God, there isn't any level of the evolution of consciousness that isn't there waiting to bring you to its arms, to its heart, to its love, and to its illumination as you grow yourself into being able to hold it, express it, understand it, and live it. It's there, and you have been doing this, and you are doing this. But don't try to look for the phenomenal aspects of it. You'll find it in your consciousness as you find how much more beautiful your mind and heart happens to be towards yourselves as well as towards those you meet. You are going to find it in the breeze and the wind, in the flower and in the tree. You're going to find it in the cosmic song of the bee. If you just open your mind and heart, because your work with the tarot is vibrating your whole being into levels of receptivity, and we are working constantly. There's never a time we are not holding that channel open for every one of you. Some of us at great cost, but it's worth it to us. As every mother will say, whatever she goes through to bear her child has been worth it. That is, if she's a real mother, it is worth it to those of us on the lower echelons, as well as those who are on the upper echelons of this vibratory health, this aid, this growth that is being poured to you, through you, and in you all times. You are never alone. You always have the help of these higher forces. Keep working with your tarot symbolisms to help bring your awareness up to becoming conscious of it. But meanwhile, know that even the vaguest thought, the vaguest need in your heart, reaching out with yearning for this, that alone is an indication it is there. Never forget, before they call, I will answer. And you are already eternally safe in samadhi and nirvana. Actually, we're growing ourselves into becoming consciously aware of it.